my name is Mr. Evangelista, and welcome to another episode of Evangelista Science. In this episode, we're going to talk about Chapter 6, which is on chemical kinetics, part of the IB Chem SL curriculum. So let's talk about reaction rate. So in class, we did a lab, and we made these oxygen and hydrogen gas generators. You can probably tell our graph, if we graph the concentration of the product over time, would look something like this, where the gas generators were really vigorous in the beginning. Then they start to lose their potency over time, and the rate decreases over time. So we can see that the rate is not constant throughout the reaction. It's really fast in the beginning and kind of plateaus towards the end. And so if we were to find the reaction rate, it's best to just look at the reaction rate at a specific time because it does change over time. In this example here, they wanted to figure out the reaction rate at 120 seconds into the experiment. The way that you do that is you draw a tangent line to the curve. So you draw a line which is optimally only touching the curve at one point. And to figure out the rate from that line, you would find the slope of that line. Now the slope is rise over run. So to figure out the slope of this line, you need to choose 2 points. So let's choose the 2 points that are furthest away from each other. That'll give me the best data possible. So let me choose this point and this point over here, and let me figure out the rise of the run. The rise is going to be negative 2.4 because I'm going to be going down 2.4, so negative 2.4. On this axis, I've got moles per decimeter cubed, and on this axis, I've got time in seconds. The rise is down 2.4, and the run is 283. And so that's how you can figure out the reaction rate by drawing a tangent line. Let's look at some more examples. Let's say I wanted to find the reaction rate right when the experiment started at 0 seconds. So I'm going to draw a tangent line to the curve and do rise over run. The rise is going to be negative 1.92, and the run is going to be about 67 seconds. Again, if I wanted to find the reaction rate at 90 seconds, I would draw a tangent line and find the slope of that line. The rise is minus 1.18, and the run is 160. So when we're doing these experiments, there are a lot of things that you can measure to try and measure the rate of the experiment. One is a change in volume. So you can set up something like this, and then you'll measure the change in volume that the gases will press on the syringe. We've also collected gas over water several times, so you should be familiar with the setup. We can look at the change in mass over time. So we've added calcium carbonate with some hydrochloric acid, and we would lose this gas. So we can measure the change in mass because we'd be losing this gas over time. You can do that with some kind of setup here. To measure rate, we can also look at changes in colors or absorption. So we can measure the color changes with colorimetry or spectra, or we can use a spectrophotometry, it's hard to say, which will measure how much light is being transmitted by the solution. And so if you have something that is changing color or transparency over the reaction, you can use either one of these techniques. Other rate experiments, you can measure the change in concentration doing a titration. We'll talk about those more when we talk about acids and bases. You can measure the change in concentration based on conductivity. Maybe there are more ions that are being created in solution or less ions, and so you will be able to measure the electrical conductivity of the water based on the ionic concentration. You can also do a clock reaction, which we did in class, or the iodine clock reaction, where you are just timing until you get this single point of change. The example they give in your book is, they put these two solutions together and they measure the time at which you are no longer able to see the X at the bottom of that little paper at the bottom of the beaker. Let's talk about activation energy. Activation energy is the energy needed to start a reaction. I'm sure you've seen this before sometime in your scientific career. And we can lower activation energy by the use of a catalyst. You can see the uncatalyzed reaction has a really high activation energy, but if we add a catalyst, activation energy becomes lower. Important to note that catalysts are not used up in the reaction, so they are recyclable, they are renewable. They do not get used up. They catalyze as many reactions as possible. Okay, the Maxwell-Boltzman curve. These are curves that show the distribution of the number of particles against the kinetic energy. Okay, and they kind of look like this. They pretty much show how many particles are on average going to have this much energy and have this much energy, and so we can see that majority of the particles are going to have this much energy. Now, if we're looking at this in terms of reactions, this is the probability of having, remember, for a reaction to occur, you have to overcome the activation energy. Activation energy is the energy needed for a reaction to occur. And so the particles that have enough energy to react are going to be the ones that have more energy than the activation energy. And so this blue area here is the probability that, or the distribution that you will have particles that have enough energy to react. And here's a Maxwell-Boltzman distribution curve at different temperatures. So we know that increasing the temperature will increase the reaction rate for the most part. And the reason that is actually increases, so both of these curves have the same area because they have the same number of particles. It's just that the red curve here has a greater distribution that is past the activation energy. And that is why increasing the temperature will actually increase the reaction rate, because more particles have a higher probability, have a higher distribution, have a higher average kinetic energy to react. Here, let's take a look at a Maxwell-Boltzman distribution curve with a catalyst. We'll notice that the catalyst will actually move the activation energy to the left here so that we have a greater area, a greater distribution of particles that have enough energy for a reaction to occur. Okay, factors affecting reaction rate. They are temperature, concentration, particle size, pressure, and a catalyst. So we talked about having the perfect high five in class and how you have to have the correct orientation and you have to hit with enough energy in order for you to get a proper high five. So temperature, if the particles are moving around faster, then chances are you'll get a better high five because you're going at a better speed. The more people you have with their hands out, the more chances of you randomly high-fiving somebody correctly. If I were particle size, if you have a huge hand like you put on those foam fingers, then the chances of you being able to hit somebody's hand for a good high five is larger. Also, if you make like the particle sizes really, really tiny, then that's better than big chunks of reagents. Pressure, if you really pressurize the reactants, like let's say of a gas, then they collide with each other more. And catalyst, we said lower the activation energy, and so that's going to increase the reaction. Okay, that's it for this chapter, actually. Really quick chapter. So as long as you know those things, you'll be good for the test.